So today we hope to offer insights into what our kids and teens are going through, what schools are doing to respond, and what we can do to help. So thank you for being here, and I'm gonna turn it over to Dana.
Great. Thank you, Irina. I'm very happy to see all your faces. I know that some of you can't stay the whole time, and that is fine. We're happy to have you. I think we have a few folks who are popping in and out this morning. So I think you all know me, but I'm Dana Shainin. I'm the CEO of Jewish Learning Works. This is my 4th year as CEO. And it has been a year, as Irina said. I started just after the COVID lockdown, and then I had 2 middle years, and now we have what we are all experiencing. So I'm going to say very little today. I mostly have the pleasure of making introductions, and the first one is of Dr. Betsy Stone, and I'm going to read you her official bio. Betsy is a retired psychologist with a passion for wellness, which I think is an understatement, but that's what her bio says. After retiring from her private practice, Betsy became an essential voice during the pandemic and has presented virtual and live sessions on anxiety, grief, and trauma in dozens of Jewish organizations around the country. She is the author of Refuah Shlema, Reflections on Healing and Growth, which does really a beautiful job of collecting all of the amazing inspirational writing that she did during the pandemic. And if you don't have that, you should pick it up. And she is one of our community's favorite teachers. She's actually going to be here live and in person next week doing a session on building from strength for people who work with children and teens. So she will be doing an expanded version for the educators of what she is doing for all of you today. So Betsy, you are up, and I will probably just give you a little, 5-minute warning when we're getting near time.
Thank you. And please give me that warning. And a request for all of you. This is that teaching is much more useful when we are in dialogue. And so if I say things that you have questions about or comments about or arguments with, please don't be polite. Please share those with the group so that we can actually have as much conversation as possible. I think it's we are absolutely thinking about the world since October 7th as a changed world. It's really difficult for us to talk about October 7th without going back the 4 years of the 4 years ago when we went into lockdown. Not because the lockdown itself has anything to do with October 7th. But because of the impact that the lockdown has had on adults and children and teens. When we first came out of lockdown, one of the things people talked about a lot was learning loss. I confess, as a psychologist, I was never concerned particularly about learning loss. What I've been concerned about and continue to be concerned about and this is a concern which is now exacerbated by the last 5 months, is the loss of soft skills. And what do I mean by soft skills? If you were, for example, in lockdown in kindergarten, there were things you still learned the letters. Letters is, you still learned the basic curriculum of kindergarten. But what you didn't learn, which is what I would call soft skills, is how to wait your turn, how to sit on a mat, how to walk in the hallway, how to share pencils, things which sound like they're trivial, but which 3rd grade teachers, because the kids who were in lockdown in kindergarten are now in 3rd grade, 3rd grade teachers don't know how to teach these things. They actually presume that children have those skills. The kids who were supposed to be in 6th grade, or that's when middle school starts where I am, did not learn soft skills that have to do with being in middle school. Again, how to walk in the hall, how to manage multiple teachers and changing classroom populations as you go from class to class. They didn't learn how to figure out where to sit in the lunchroom. those are soft skills which we use because in most elementary schools, you sit by class in the lunchroom, and in middle school, you no longer sit by class. Those are skills which have to do with social development. Our children didn't get those skills from at the time when they would be supported by their teachers. It's not that they can't develop those skills. It's that sixth grade teachers know how to teach kids how to walk in the hallway, and how to navigate those newly challenging social situations, so that our current 9th and 10th graders didn't get those skills. We see that in lots of ways. We see the kind of the detritus of that in lots of ways. Some of them we would be seeing anyway because of the impact of cell phones and the decrease of kind of social connection, because cell phones can create blockades between social connections. But one of the things that we do see as then part of the post-October 7th experience is that our children also don't know how to navigate lots of difficult situations. The challenge of being in a socially challenging situation, in an intellectually challenging situation, a lot of those soft skills are skills that our kids did not develop. Now, let's add to that, and this is largely background from the post-October 7th. Let's add to that we know that one of the impacts of No Child Left Behind, that was the 1990s era Bush educational I don't know the word I want, is that we stopped teaching critical thinking. That critical thinking used to be a part of the curriculum in particularly high schools, but also in middle and elementary schools. Critical thinking could not be assessed on the testings that were used to assess No Child Left Behind, which was really assessment of teachers, not assessment of children. And so we have multiple generations of children, young adults, and emerging adults, teens and emerging adults, who don't have critical thinking skills. I'm going to argue that this is a space that Jewish institutions have a particular ability to address and improve. That one of the things that happens in Jewish educational spaces, because we are not only teaching to the test, and the test is often bar mitzvah, we have the space and time to ask impossible questions. And impossible questions are actually one of the great gifts of educational opportunity. I want children to have the space in which they can ask questions that don't have good answers. And that is for many of us, part of the struggle that we are dealing with right now. That the situation in Israel is a situation in which there aren't good and clear answers, in which we have confused, ambivalent, even opposing emotional and intellectual approaches to what we think and feel about what we see both on the news and what we hear from other people. So that if we don't have basic critical thinking skills, how do we assess something that is as complex as October 7th and Israel's response, regardless of what our politics are? I'm convinced that one of the things that is unique about being human is that human beings have the ability to hold disparate ideas and feelings at once. I can't assess whether or not any other mammal has the ability to do that, but that is clearly part of the experience of being human. But I believe we also have to be trained to do that, that it is tempting to reduce ourselves to simple answers. Here we live in a situation in which there are no simple answers, in which the answers themselves create challenge. So what we are hearing and seeing now, post October 7th, is somewhat situationally driven. There are spaces in the United States where this is not really on the streets. I live in Connecticut, and I am not going to, in my particular town, I am not going to encounter pro-Palestinian demonstrations. They're just not happening in my town. When I am in Manhattan, I'm in a different space. And so we have to understand that though none of us want to use this word any longer, context matters. That some of our children are exposed to much more anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist rhetoric than other children. Our kids on campus, on college campuses, are exposed to much more stuff than, again, depending on the school, than the kids in high school communities where the level of anti-Semitism is either low or hidden. But we also need to understand that there is a lot of anti-Semitic experience that our children are having that they are not reporting to us. They are not telling us everything that is happening to them. They are not telling us about the kid who walks by them in the hall when they're passing from class to class and says, fucking Jew, excuse my language, but that's the experience that they're having. And we're not hearing all of that. We need to understand that that is part of their lived experience. And that part of that lived experience is that they are in danger. Now, lots of our children feel like they're in danger in school settings anyway, because of school shootings, because of bullying. But this is targeted danger and feels differently. And for kids who don't have much of a Jewish community, for whatever reason, it is not only targeted danger, but it is a profound sense of isolation and differentness that they have not had in the past. One of the interesting things that we are seeing, this is anecdotal, I have seen no data on this, but anecdotally, we are hearing that there are more people, adults and adolescents in particular, who are now wanting to find themselves in Jewish spaces, not in terms of pro-Israel spaces, but simply spaces where I feel it is okay to be Jewish. So BBYO is having increases in attendance. Synagogues are having people wanting, this is, again, it's anecdotal. Synagogues are reporting that they want, that people are coming in saying, I want to know more about being Jewish. I want to know more about the history of the conflict in Israel. We are seeing increases in conversion requests from Jewish adjacent family members, so that if there's a couple in which one is Jewish and the other one has really lived a Jewish adjacent life, we are seeing increases in that second person's interest in conversion. So it is not that Jews are running from Judaism. In many spaces, Jews are running to Judaism in new ways that we have not done. So when one of the real issues, I think, in terms of our work with adolescents is helping them navigate finding spaces in which being Jewish feels safe and acceptable. There are kids, look, BBYO is the primary youth movement in the United States. I don't know if it is the primary youth movement in the Bay Area. There are kids for whom BBYO does not work, either because it is too social and not intellectual enough, or because it has a reputation, a historical reputation for drugs and sex, and for kids for whom that is too scary it is not the right space. We have to be thinking about other spaces and other relationships for those children to be building. And we know, lots of data tells us that the more reliable relationships adolescents have with adults, the healthier they are, both in adolescence and as they grow. Being a reliable adult to an adolescent is a profound responsibility. That does not mean that everyone an adolescent reaches out to is good at being a reliable adult. One of the things that I think we really need to be exploring in educational spaces is the question of how we help kids ask their own questions rather than answer the questions they ask. I was just at the CCAR, which is a rabbinic organization for Reform rabbis, and I said to them, if a kid asks you if you believe in God, they're not asking you about you. They're asking you about them. They're saying, do I believe in God? Should I believe in God? There are so many of us who work with adolescents who actually answer questions. I think it is one of the great mistakes when you're with adolescents and emerging adults. They're not asking you questions. They're asking you to help them explore themselves. One of the places that we are seeing real challenge is in intergenerational dialogue around Israel and particularly around Gaza. These are dialogues, and they may be between grandparents and grandchildren, they may be between parents and children, they may be between friend groups as well. Those of us who are older grew up on an image of Israel that was Israel as the weakest creature in the region. Our children did not grow up with that. Our children actually see Israel, many of them, as a superpower, not as China, Russia, or the United States, but as armed as China, Russia, and the United States. And so the question of Gaza is a profoundly distressing question for them. How can you be a Zionist and see Israel as an oppressor? That is the space that lots of our children are living in, and it is the exposure that lots of our children are having in other spaces. This is about teaching complexity. It is not only about teaching them complexity, it is actually also about understanding complexity for ourselves. So that if I am having a conversation with an adolescent who says, but Israel is the oppressor, I have to let them teach me before I can teach them. Very often we respond to kids saying things that we don't want to hear by telling them they're wrong, as opposed to by giving them the space to educate us. We have not done a good enough job at teaching our children or their parents about the complexities of this region and about the complexities of our relationship to the region itself. Let me pause and ask you for questions before I keep going, because I've just babbled at you for a really long time. I want to make sure if you want to argue with me, ask questions, make comments, that you have a chance to do that. Just unmute yourself if you would. I was so good. Okay. Please feel free to ask questions, to make comments. The issues around mental health for adolescents are very important for us to be aware of. They predate the pandemic. They were profoundly exacerbated in the pandemic and are challenged by the post-October 7th world in which our kids live. There is one piece of data that I feel is incredibly important for us to understand and think about. In the post-pandemic period, in the post-vaccine period, I'm not sure that we'll ever be post-pandemic quite. In the post-vaccine period, we saw an increase in emergency room visits for adolescents. That should not have surprised anyone. The increase for male identifying adolescents was 4%, which from my point of view was trivial. The increase in emergency room visits for self-harm and suicidal thinking for adolescent female identifying adolescents was 51%, 51. That's huge. Our daughters are at much greater risk than we actually knew. Now, I have a theory about why that is. And my son tells me I'm wrong about this. So I always tell him, I'll tell them that I'm wrong, but I'm going to tell you my theory about this. My theory about this is that during the pandemic, boys, male identifying kids, were much more likely to be in video game spaces, which are actually communities and are often really misogynistic and not welcoming to female identifying children or adolescents. And if I'm correct about that, then what it means is that many of our boys had community, even if it was only the community of video games, in which there is conversation and there is interaction. And our girls did not. And so I think that the impact of isolation was much more profound for girls than it was for boys. We continue to see that girls are struggling in ways in greater numbers than boys are struggling. Kids who identify as queer are also struggling in ways that many of our male identifying kids are not struggling. So that we have populations that are at greater risk and populations that are at lesser risk. It does seem that the boys are at lesser risk than the girls, and they are at lesser risk than kids who identify in the LGBTQIA catchment. So our children are not as good at hard conversations as we wish they could be. They don't learn those skills in school. That's kind of what debate club used to be for. But it is also what happens when you have a gifted history teacher or English teacher who teaches you not simply what you should know, but what it means and where it comes from, and who educates you around issues, the kinds of issues that are present when we say that history is written by the victors. What would the history be like if it was written by somebody else? If I don't have debate skills, and I'm now not talking about true debate, but if I don't have the ability to have a dialogue with you, then what happens very quick, particularly a difficult dialogue with you, what happens very quickly is that we start flinging accusations at each other. Murderer, racist. And once those accusations are flung, there is no conversation. I can't defend myself against those things. So part of what I think we need to be thinking about in all of our Jewish learning spaces is how we equip our children and young adults to have conversations which are challenging, without reducing ourselves to the the accusations and the slurs. That can happen that can and should happen in Jewish community. It does not happen in the spaces where the ADL comes in and we lecture kids. That actually, that isn't enough practice. And so one of the things I think we have to parse the difference between learning what to say and learning how to engage. The words are one thing, the engagement skills are another. I think we are pretty good at giving kids the words. I think we are not anywhere near as good at giving them the engagement skills. And so I want to suggest that 5 minutes, okay, that we have to find ways to do that. What I hope I'm communicating to you, and what I hope, and what I will say now explicitly, is that there aren't other spaces besides Jewish educational spaces. And I'm not content-driven spaces, but relationally driven spaces of learning spaces. There aren't other spaces for our kids to learn about their identity, the Jewish aspect of their identity. They're not going to learn that in public settings, and they're not going to learn that sitting in shul. When we want to assist kids in exploring their Jewish identity, we need gifted educators who are comfortable with confusion, who are comfortable with impossible questions, who are comfortable following children in the learning and approaches where they are interested, rather than creating more spaces in which we tell them who to be and how to be. And so I want to commend the work of Jewish Learning Works, and I want to suggest to you that in many ways, the identities of subsequent generations will be built on the way on the spaces we create right now, the spaces that we create where kids can talk about their life experiences, whether it is getting shoved when you walk down the hall and having someone curse you, or the question of the really huge question of how did God let this happen? How are we going to support our kids through the first anniversary of this massacre, which will fall right between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? What are we going to be giving people and creating for people, both in terms of space and in terms of acceptance, as they process the experience of the last 5 months, the experience going forward? It is in the spaces where gifted educators exist that children are supported, and that therefore Jews are made. Thank you. Questions, comments, arguments? Dana?
If no one has a question, we will, I will introduce Hadass, and you may have questions that may emerge for her or Betsy after she speaks. So we asked Betsy to be here today to give sort of the meta view of what is going on in the world for children. We asked Hadass to give the Tachlis view, right? The I don't even know how you translate Tachlis from Hebrew, the details, the stuff, right? So let me tell you who Hadass is. She is, to me, one of the bright lights in Bay Area Jewish education. She is now the director of Temple Sinai in Oakland, but she spent 14 years at Contra Costa Jewish Day School, teaching Hebrew and Judaic studies and coordinating both their service learning and their Israel education. She's a recipient of the Diller Award for Excellence in Jewish Education, which is one of the highest honors that we give here in the Bay Area community. And she lived in Israel Israel for 9 years and grew up in the Midwest as the child of Israeli parents. So I asked Hadass to speak just a little bit about what she has been seeing at Temple Sinai this year, how things have changed, how they're supporting families in the ways that Betsy's talking about, and also just to give a little bit of flavor about how Jewish Learning Works has supported her and her teachers. It's all yours, Hadass.
Thanks so much, Dana. And I just want to clarify, I'm not the director of Temple Sinai. I'm the education director. Those are big shoes. I would not want to even try to start to fill my executive director's shoes. But I want to thank you, Dana, for that intro. And Betsy, wow, I don't know if you could see me, but I was nodding and really, really appreciative of your clarity on so much of what has been going on. I really appreciate also just this opportunity to speak to all of you. Writing for me has always been an important way to process what's going on in my life. So trying to write out what I wanted to share with you this morning really gave me some permission to take space and time to reflect as I'm continuing to work, as we all are, to comprehend what's happening in my heart, in my head, in my neshama, in my spirit, as we're working and living through one of the most difficult times in modern Jewish history. I also feel a real honor in getting to share with you some of the ways that I've felt supported and held by Jewish Learning Works during this challenging time. And full disclosure, I'm a total Jewish Learning Works groupie, and I've benefited greatly from the gifts of this organization in so many ways, personally and professionally, since I came to the Bay Area 16 years ago. So they're my go-to for all things Jewish education related, and I'm really, really glad to have the opportunity to speak to their immense contributions to our field, and just to tell you how fortunate we are to have them in our community. So I was barely 4 months into my brand new position as Director of Education at Temple Sinai on October 7th. The night before, on October 6th, our religious school community had just celebrated Simchat Torah together in a Ruach-filled Friday night service event of prayer and singing and dancing. There were close to 300 people there, joyously gathered in celebration. And then we all went home, and the unthinkable happened. On October 8th, Sinai hosted a community gathering to attempt to provide comfort for our community, and also to get together to pray for peace. In that visual space, myself and another longtime educator who is part of our youth education staff facilitated space for parents, grandparents, and really anyone who was looking for support in trying to discuss the emergency situation with children of all ages. I think just in kind of referring back to Betsy's wisdom, trying to give adults permission to not have answers, but to hold space for asking difficult questions and for feeling difficult feelings. Due to the holiday, we did not have religious school planned for the following Sunday, but we did have teen program the following Tuesday after October 7th, and gathering our teen teaching staff and planning together how we would create safe space for our teens to process felt like avodat kodesh. It felt like really holy work. And then planning for the following Sunday, when we would have more than 230 K through 5th graders gathered and 50 teen and adult teaching staff who were all grappling with a whole spectrum of feelings and experiences. The whole situation felt really daunting. But Jewish Learning Works was there right away to help us navigate with resources that I was able to share immediately with my teaching staff who were looking for guidance, and then also, of course, with our parents who were searching for what to do when you don't have answers, but yes, to have information for how to navigate these uncharted waters with their families. I had outreach from other synagogue administrators who had heard that we were sharing resources, and I was really able to pass the Jewish Learning Works resources on. I just in general felt so supported and grateful for having Jewish Learning Works to lean on. Because they're such a well-respected institution in our community, being able to write that these resources had come from Jewish Learning Works felt like a solid, trustworthy, credible source during a time of deep confusion and pain. I knew that I could stand behind the sources with, I mean, of course, I looked at them as well, but I could share them with the confidence that Jewish Learning Works had chosen them thoughtfully and with intentionality. At Sinai, I experienced a lot of tenderness in our community during those first few weeks. People were reaching out to check in on me, to check in on my family. And there seemed to be this real renewed urgency and appreciation for being together in community. And over the next few months, kind of alluding to what you mentioned, Betsy, I had conversations with many new unaffiliated families who were reaching out to the synagogue because they were seeking to reconnect with their own Judaism and wanting to share it with their children and just really find their way back into Jewish community. Within the existing community, our parents had lots of questions. Many came with the sense that they didn't themselves have the knowledge base that they wanted and needed in order to be able to speak intelligently with their children. So our amazing clergy at Sinai offered an Israel 101 workshop on a Sunday morning during religious school. We had more than 150 parents and adult community members in attendance. We had outreach from mental health professionals in our Sinai family who held listening circles for parents who just really felt like they needed to be together and hold one another during this time. So they were able to do that during religious school time. Our clergy went deeper and I feel like exhibited a lot of omits, a lot of bravery in holding ongoing small group conversations with people who really wanted to have the harder conversations. And we continue as a community to share resources and bring in guest speakers and try to do what we can to help families navigate unprecedented anti-Semitism with their families and just try to make sense of this world, which feels like it's turned upside down. Personally, I remember coming to work at the synagogue in Oakland for the first time after October 7th and just literally feeling unsafe driving in my car down the highway because all of a sudden motorcyclists looked like terrorists and I was driving and crying and it was very unsafe. But as soon as I walked onto campus, I felt safe. I know that a lot of folks in our community have struggled with feelings of safety in Jewish spaces during this time, but I have to say that the synagogue is really the space in which I feel safest, not just physically, but also emotionally. I feel really grateful to have a space in which I'm understood and people are sensitive to one another and I don't have to explain or defend my feelings or my identity. I continue to realize again and again that no matter how challenging, there's no place that I would rather be right now, professionally and personally, than in a Jewish setting. No other place where I could imagine myself. So in the days following October 7th, I really deeply appreciated the personal outreach from Jewish Learning Works staff. And then this most precious question, what do you need? Like, that was just such a great question to get from them. So in late October, after reaching out to us as Jewish educators and administrators working in the field, Jewish Learning Works put together this Working Through War series with the Israeli consultant that Irina mentioned before, Dasi Berkowitz from Israel. During her online workshop, Dasi introduced us to the concept of Jewish paradigms of resilience, which I really loved. And two which spoke to me that I want to share with you were protection, setting boundaries, kind of in the ruach, in the spirit of Shabol v'Zachol, keep and remember the Sabbath, which were commanded in 2 places in the Torah. And then this other idea of setting or creating a circle of support. Kne lecha rav, aseh lecha chaver, like make yourself a rav or a teacher, and acquire for yourself a friend from Pirkei Avot. So I think for me during this time, setting boundaries for myself, the shamor v'zachol, giving myself time to grieve and heal and struggle, alongside the gaining of rav, of teachers and friends, and drawing strength from my community was really, really important. And Dasi's session gave me tools to see the opportunities to heal and support one another during this time of tragedy. I was able to gather strength and inspiration from Sinai's teens who were bravely wearing their Magen David necklaces and standing up to online anti-Semitism, and really just holding space for one another, for teachers and for parents who needed to talk and to cry and to be hugged and to hug. I know that moving forward, as Betsy was really importantly alluding, we have so much work to be done in thinking and rethinking about how we teach Israel in our communities. This idea of impossible questions, of elu ve'elu, like how do we hold both? And the complexity and the idea of respectful and healthy debate in our community. I personally know that the new directors group that Jewish Learning Works has been convening for myself and other new religious school leaders in our community will continue to be a source of support and strength for me, and a really safe space to ask difficult questions as we try to figure our way out forward. And similarly, new teachers on my team have had this really amazing gift of Jewish Learning Works mentors who have been helping them in so many ways throughout this year. I feel myself simultaneously relieved and excited to know that Jewish Learning Works will be there to help us to take on this really pressing challenge of teaching Israel post October 7th. The thoughtfulness, the rigor, the relevance that they bring to the table for us all the time is such a profound source of support and a nurturing force in this really challenging field of Jewish education, where it's so vitally important for us to invest and sustain our efforts to achieve excellence. So I just, from the bottom of my heart, toda rabah, and really, really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today. Thanks.
I have questions. Do any of you have questions? Such a quiet group. Betsy, do you think that parents understand what you're saying about critical thinking skills? Do you think do you think they realize that kids are not getting them in secular school? And do you think they see that Jewish educational spaces are places where their kids might learn such things?
Oh, it's such a good question. No, I don't think that they recognize that they're not getting them in secular school. I think that parents largely, and particularly parents with privilege, look at schools as a way as the path to the next kind of privilege. So the point of school is to get good grades, and not necessarily to learn how to think. And the way you get good grades in many parts of our educational system is by accepting and spitting back. So no, I don't think that they recognize that. Look, there's many things about many kinds of generational shifts that really also exacerbate that. The number of people who eat dinner together as a family, the number of families that eat dinner together is decreasing on an almost annual basis. Families do not have shared meals the way historically families had shared meals. And part of what happens in a shared meal is conversation that can be actually critical thinking skills. Now, other things happen in shared meals: who is going to drive who, so where, and whether or not you're allowed to go to that party. but there's a lot of conversation in a meal that takes more than 5 minutes, and not all our meals do, that might be about the questions about what I did today. Was what I did today the right thing? What did I read in the news? Was I kind today? There are lots of spaces in which historically we've seen both social and critical thinking skills developed, that where we no longer really see those developed. And it's been fascinating to me. For many years, I don't do this anymore, it stopped during the pandemic, but I taught a class for 6th and 7th graders and their parents. And it was, and my intent in my own synagogue school, my intention was to use Torah to teach critical thinking. I was very explicit about that with my educator. And what was really striking to me was how much the adults valued the critical thinking development. How much the adults wanted to have those ask those impossible questions. And because they're fun, but they're not fun if I don't feel like I have the skills. If I'm going to be embarrassed by my inability to have those conversations, I don't want to even go there. But as soon as I develop some skills around it, it's a lot of fun. What I find, what I would suggest is that there's really kind of two groups of adolescents, and it's a Venn diagram where there is overlap. There are adolescents who want to be with other adolescents playing. And you know, they want to go to Disney, and they want to go out on boats, and they want to play together, and what they really want to do is be together with an activity. That's a set of kids. Another set of kids where there is also some overlap is the group of kids who really want to think, for whom thinking is an adventure. And I personally love working with those kids, because I think that when thinking is an adventure, what am I learning? I'm not learning the answer, I'm learning myself. The more that I have impossible questions to ask myself, the more I understand who I am. And so for that group of kids, remember it's an overlapping Venn diagram, the challenge is the joy.
Yeah.
How do we create that for kids? I think we create that by building relationships in which challenge occurs, and in which challenge feels not utterly safe, but not utterly safe. So that I can say to you, you know, that didn't make sense to me. Explain that to me.
Yeah.
That I think that's a gift to a kid when we ask those challenging questions. Not every kid wants that, but every kid who wants that should have it. And that is, I think, a unique gift of Jewish spaces, both because it is our history. This is what we do.
Questions.
And because if we ask questions well, what we're doing is we're building people's character. We're building their strengths. So I don't think that happens in very many schools. And I think it probably doesn't happen at very many dinner tables. So if we see that there is a need, and it's a need that makes sense Judaically, why wouldn't we be answering that need?
Yeah.
Some
of you know I have 4 children, so I like to say whenever people describe different kinds of children, I'm like, oh, I have 2 of those and 1 of those and 1 of those. That was like, apart from anything else, that was very helpful for me personally. I also have a question for Hadass, if nobody else has a question for anyone. You're all listening so attentively.
Well, I have a question.
Great.
Okay, so this is not a question for Hadass or for Dana. It is a question for those of you who opted to be here. Where do you see in the Bay Area community, where do you see these needs getting met for children, adolescents, emerging adults? What spaces are there? Because I don't know. What spaces are there that are brave spaces for teenagers, that are holding spaces for teenagers where they can allow themselves to challenge and be challenged? And if nobody answers, I'm going to start calling on people because I'm a teacher. Go ahead, Jeff. Thank you. You are brave.
Not so brave. If those who've ever sat through a rant may attest to. So I'll give you an answer, and I want to relate this a little bit back to a comment you made earlier, because I think it's relevant. So one area that I would cite are organized sports. I think that's where you learn cooperation and teamwork, but you also learn to be challenged. You also may be confronted. You're dealing with competition, etc.
Yep.
And I think that holds true to a large extent for the video game groups that you talked about earlier. Those video game groups may be overwhelmingly male, but not exclusively.
Yep.
And sports are increasingly equally accessed by all genders and identities. Title IX has been around for a very long time now, so girls are just as likely to play sports as boys. But I think it's interesting, all of these comments, I think to some extent, especially here in the Bay Area, we have maybe moved away from letting our kids experience some of that conflict and some of that pushing of boundaries, even in sports. Everybody gets a trophy. Nobody is a loser. I mean, when my kids were little, even 15 years ago now, oh, we don't keep score. Every single kid on that baseball team knew the score, right? It's ridiculous that we pretend that kids aren't competing and keeping track and testing each other. And I think we need to take the lessons perhaps learned from COVID about resiliency. And I mean, this has nothing to do with the Jewish space specifically, but we can learn these lessons and maybe re-examine some of those, like we have to remove all conflict. We have to remove all competition from these little kids. They need it to some extent. I mean, obviously in a controlled and safe manner, but we are underestimating their ability to absorb the lessons of conflict and competition and add that to their resiliency.
I could not agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. And I think that the message that our children get is that we don't think they're capable. And that's a terrible message. That our kids, when we say to them, you have a problem, I'll handle it for you, in whatever arena we say it, and we say it all the time, part of the message they receive is, I am capable of doing something which you are not capable of doing, and I don't think you can develop the skills. There is something profoundly insulting about adults solving problems for children that children can solve. And frankly, it undercuts all kinds of skill development. Vis-a-vis sports, and I absolutely agree with you, sports are a wonderful place to learn some of those incredibly important skills like teamwork. And one of the interesting things in educational spaces is that we do a lot of group work. Teachers do a lot of, putting kids in groups and doing a lot of group work, but then they don't allow for the conflict that is inevitable in group work, because I work harder at this and you work harder at that, and I'm not interested in this. And, the conflict is part of the human condition. I would go a step farther and argue that that conflict is actually a core part of intimate relationships, not violent conflict, not disrespectful conflict, but that one of the measures of intimate relationships these are the people with whom I can be in conflict and remain in relationship. As opposed to the vast majority of people where if there's a conflict, I can walk. The struggle I have around sports is that I'm not sure. I think sports teaches lots of very important skills. I don't think sports necessarily teaches us how to think. And if we have learned anything in this country, we have learned that there are a lot of people in this country who aren't great at thinking. And that thinking is probably pretty important. So I think I'm not convinced that sports teaches us how to do critical thinking. Now, I'm not an athlete, so if you're an athlete, argue with me. I like to walk. That does not teach critical thinking.
Betsy, I think Julie had a response to your question too, and then I will finish her
Go,
up.
Julie.
I'm not sure it's so relevant anymore, but one of the things I have noticed which is not about safe spaces, unfortunately, but my children who are in their 20s and 30s, it's been amazing to me that they are really not aware of all the pejorative things you can call someone who's Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
They have not had that experience. 2 out of 3 went to Jewish day school. 1 had synagogue school, and they don't often recognize the insult. And my daughter teaches high school, and she hears it, and the student that has just been called that doesn't know they've been insulted. And I just bring that up as sort of some invisible thing that is, I'm not sure what to do with it, but I don't know if anyone else has had that experience. But it's fascinating to me that they don't know that's a slur. And when a lot of these memes are up in the news and they're following the news, these are high school kids, they don't know the stereotypical images that are offensive to Jews. So they have no response.
Right.
Rather
Right.
than a neutral, they're not angry, they're ignorant. They're
That's
not
really
offended,
interesting.
they don't know. And that to me is very dangerous.
That's really interesting. I think the other aspect of that that maybe happens and maybe doesn't happen is this ongoing sense of othering. That, if you say things like, well, Jews are really smart, how can I argue with that? How can I say, no, we're not? And yet, it's drawing a line between me and others. And I think that othering is insidious in a way that offensive speech I can reject. Othering speech I may not even catch.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's lots of othering speech that our kids are experiencing.
Debbie, do you want to respond to Betsy?
Well, actually, I had a different question.
Hey, go
That's
for it.
okay. So you talked a lot about critical thinking skills, but earlier you mentioned also this need to teach kids how to engage around really difficult conversations with people who have very different views. And I think this is clearly coming up in the Israel-Gaza discussions, whether it's, I imagine Hadass at Temple Sinai, you have a wide tent of opinions. I know, like, my kids are at Camp Tawanga and counselors there. Again, a really wide view of opinions, and clearly just lecturing people about what you see as the facts, that's not effective. This is really hard for kids and adults. So I'm curious, like, what are you doing, or what are best practices? Like, what works in terms of teaching how to engage in a way that's actually productive and not just, to shut down someone else.
Hadass, you want to take that since you've been in that space?
Absolutely. I'm happy to, Debbie. That's it's such a great question, and it's really something that as educators, we hope that we've set the groundwork for and kind of built like a foundation to build on when, you know, a really, really painfully complex and sensitive debate like we're having now around Israel, or actually Israel has always kind of felt like that. I think in so many spaces, but I think that it starts from like younger kiddos who are probably not ready to have those conversations yet, but really teaching listening skills and also kind of empowering them in the ways that Betsy was talking about, with kind of the feeling that, hey, I can actually, I'm capable of sorting through this difference of opinion, or I'm capable of, or I have the tools to make it through this conflict. So whether it's kind of mediating little people having an argument or a conflict or a fight over a toy, right? And having them listen to one another, take turns talking, and even paraphrasing. Did you hear what Shlomo just said about how that made him feel? And what did he say? And kind of not coming in and trying to solve the problems for them, but instilling in them that confidence that actually I can do this. I have the tools to navigate conflict with my peers. But I think that that critical thinking piece and the feeling that there's not necessarily always a right or wrong or a black or a white kind of two more complicated issues as kids are dealing with more and more complex topics as they grow, and just really encouraging them to take the time to do research on both sides of an issue that they have questions about, and really that listening skill, I think, and finding ways to help them to engage in respectful debate with this kind of overarching Jewish sensibility of B'Tselem Elohim, that we're all created in the image of God. I feel like we've leaned really heavily on so many of our Jewish values to help us navigate now and during other difficult times. But how do we look for the ways in which everyone can be our Rav, everyone can be our teacher, you know, and open us up to new ways of thinking about things. But you're right, like it is a skill that adults, that we struggle with as well. But I think that active listening, the curiosity and the humility of coming to the table with, I don't necessarily know the right or wrong answer to this question. I know what I'm thinking and feeling, and let me hear what you're thinking and feeling, and let's see how we can expand our perspectives together.
I think we also have to acknowledge that there are spaces in which I can dislike something and still care about the person doing it or the entity doing it. That I can care about Israel and disapprove of some of the actions that the leadership has taken, as I could do about the United States. And that level of complex relationship is really an indication that it matters to me. The thing that continues to confuse me, and I don't have an answer to this, is why this particular horrible conflict is the one that people have opinions about. That we're not as obsessed with the Sudan or the Rohingya or Ukraine, but holding that even in abeyance. I don't think many of us have completely clear either feelings or thoughts about the United States. Why would we expect ourselves to have that about Israel? And so, but that, of course, Debbie, that requires that I'm willing to live in complexity. as opposed to, look, on October 8th, I had no complexity. I had no complexity. An Israeli friend of mine said to me, on October 8th, I was Ben-Gvir. I get that. I am not Ben-Gvir anymore. I'm much more complicated than that. And I think that, look, we have to model that for our children over and over and over again, that it is acceptable to be uncomfortable.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to hold you there because I'm watching the time and I want to give Julie time to wrap us up. In case any of you thought we were going to answer any of these questions today, we are not. But we do, just one more point to make is that I'm glad that this issue of listening and respectful disagreement has come up, because this is one of the things that Jewish Learning Works has done a lot of work around in the last 5 years. Respectful communication and nonviolent communication and compassionate listening. And sometimes we get asked, what do these things have to do with education? And I always think, what could be more important to education? And I think Hadass and Betsy both made that point beautifully. So I'm going to give the last word to Julie Dorsey, who, as I said at the beginning, is a former board president, 2-time board president at both Jewish Learning Works and at Gideon Hausner Jewish Day School, and is an active congregational member on the peninsula and has been a Jewish Learning Works supporter for a long time. So Julie, why don't you close us up?
Thanks, Dana. My mind is just full, which is always a benefit of being involved with Jewish Learning Works. So I think that's why I've hung around for so long. I'm always, the people are just amazing, and we have a lot of these thoughtful conversations. I really wanted to make the case for the benefits of educators who take part in our programs, and Hadass did a much better job of that, just describing how she relies on us. I think I will always say us and we. I still feel a little ownership there. I can't quite say you. So I don't need to repeat that, but I did want to say that I feel like we are, sort of the first line of defense for teachers, and teachers are the first responders. And Jewish Learning Works amazes me in the way the programs come about instantaneously. They are so nimble, and something is offered the moment the community needs it. And I've always been impressed by that. And just from listening today, I can tell that has even ramped up a bit, perhaps, that these programs are really getting out there very quickly, and a lot of people are benefiting from them. I come from a long line of teachers, so I really understand, and I'm a teacher myself. I taught at UC Santa Cruz for years, but one of the things I want to remind all of us, and especially with the work that you're all doing right now that is especially difficult, regarding recent events, is that the work of teachers is often so invisible. You touch a student, they remember something. You may never find out if it helped them or not. I'm sure everyone in the room has an experience where they look back and they think, that was a really good teacher. I didn't realize it at the time, but boy, that was a really good teacher. And once in a while, you do get a student who comes to you and tells you something, but it's invisible. And the learning is cumulative, but it's not immediately obvious. So I feel like teachers make a much bigger an impact than we sometimes know. And so these little things are big things. And I think Jewish Learning Works is really making a difference in supporting the teachers, emphasizing the pedagogy that they might need to get their to teach their students best. And it's not always appreciated, it's not always obvious, but the work is life-changing. The work is life-changing, and I think Jewish Learning Works is just a really important part of that work. So, and I'm only feeling stronger about that having listened here for the last hour. So please continue to support Jewish Learning Works. It is more important than ever, as I know you all know. And if you want more information, I always have to make the case for contacting Dana, because she breaks a land speed record for replying to your email. And she will get you the resources you need immediately. And you know, tell all your friends. We want to spread the word. We are somehow I feel we're a little bit under the radar, and programs like this let me know that that's not the case at all. So, but the more the merrier. So thank you so much.
Yes.
And it was lovely to learn with everyone this morning.
Thanks everyone for being here. We appreciate you. Be well.